The box arrived on a Wednesday. Not through the formal diplomatic channel, not through the courier system that connected the Vale territories to the capital, not through the trade route's official correspondence infrastructure, not through any of the particular, documented. The Crown receives this through the proper mechanism channels that the Crown's administrative architecture maintained. The box arrived through the servant entrance, carried by a woman on foot, presented to the doorstaff with the particular, calm, "I am delivering this, and then I am leaving" quality that deliveries carried when the deliverer had no intention of remaining. The box was unremarkable. Cedar, approximately 8 inches by 8 inches by 4. The joinery was precise, dovetailed corners, the particular, skilled, a carpenter made, this quality that precision joinery communicated. The surface was unfinished, raw cedar, unvarnished, carrying the particular, aromatic, cedar is cedar quality that the wood's natural oils produced. No seal, no label, one word burned into the lid in the particular, careful, each letter deliberate quality that hand-burned lettering carried when the burning was slow, and the slow was the care, and the care was the content. The word was, yours. The door steward, Petter Lund, 15 years in the position, the particular, seen everything, nothing surprises quality that long-service door staff produced, assessed the delivery with the professional's eye. The assessment found, a woman, approximately 30, omega, dressed in the practical, non-palace, this is working clothing quality, that non-court people wore. The clothing was clean, but not formal. The face was calm. The calm was complete. Not the performed calm of a person managing anxiety, but the genuine, settled, I have decided to do this, and the deciding is finished quality that genuine calm produced. The woman was not nervous. The woman was not excited. The woman had brought something, and the bringing was complete, and the completion was the only quality the woman appeared to possess at this moment. What is this? The steward's question carried the professional's assessment. The particular, I am responsible for what, enters this palace quality that the responsibility produced in the question. Something that belongs here, the woman's response. Carrying the particular, plain, the answer is sufficient quality that plain responses carried when the responding person had no interest in elaboration. Something that belongs here. Not, I found this. Not, I am returning this. Not, please tell the king. Something that belongs here. The most minimal formulation of the maximum content. Your name? The steward's follow-up. The woman had already turned. The turning was the leaving. The particular. The delivery is complete. The deliverer is departing quality that completed deliveries produced in the deliverer. The departure was not dramatic. The woman walked. The walking was the leaving. The leaving was quiet. The quiet was total. The steward held the box. Cedar, 8 by 8 by 4. Yours burned into the lid. Something that belongs here. He carried it through the servant entrance into the palace's administrative interior, through the corridors that connected the entrance to the receiving office, and into the hands of the receiving officer whose function was the assessment of deliveries whose nature was ambiguous, and whose ambiguous was a cedar box, delivered by a woman who left before her name could be confirmed, containing something that belongs here, with nothing else to go on. The receiving officer escalated. The escalating was the chain, the particular, upward, I cannot assess this, without more authority quality, that ambiguous deliveries produced in the chain's lower levels. The chain carried the box upward, through the administrative hierarchy, until the box reached the level at which the authority was sufficient for the assessment's completion. The sufficient level was the Crown. Alpha King Einar Vale received the box at the governance desk during the late morning session. He received it the way he received everything that the chain delivered, with the governance's assessment, what is this, and what does it require? The governance's assessment was applied to the cedar surface, the dovetailed corners, the burned word. The assessment found, the box is skilled, personal, deliberate. The word is yours. The word implies previous ownership. Previous ownership implies the contents once belonged to the Crown, and the belonging is being restored. The Crown's inventory. The particular, comprehensive, everything the Crown owns is documented quality that the inventory provided. The inventory's function. Cross-reference the delivery against the listed holdings. Identify the item whose return the delivery represents. close the administrative gap the absence had produced. The inventory was retrieved. The cross-reference was initiated. The item was identified. The identification stopped the cross-reference. Not because the identification was difficult, because the identification was impossible. The inventory listed no missing items. The Crown's documented holdings were complete. Every item accounted for. No gaps, no absences. The cross-reference found. Nothing is missing. If nothing is missing, the box contains something the inventory doesn't know is missing, something the Crown didn't know it had lost. Einar opened the box. His hands were shaking before the lid was fully lifted. Not because he had seen the contents. The lid was not yet open. The shaking began before the seeing. The shaking was the knowing. The particular, bodily, the body knows before the eyes confirm quality, that the body produced when the body contained information, the mind was catching up to, and the catching up's anticipation was the shaking. Because the body recognized the box. Not the cedar, not the joinery, not the burned word. The size, 8 by 8 by 4. The size was the memory, and the memory was 22 years old, and the memory was the shaking, and the shaking was, I know what is in this box. I have known what was in this box for 22 years. I did not know I knew until this moment. And the knowing has arrived through a cedar box, delivered by an unnamed woman who left before she could be thanked. The lid opened. Inside, a velvet cloth. Dark blue, the veil Crown's color, the particular, institutional. This is the Crown's color quality that the blue carried. The cloth was folded with the particular, careful, what is inside is precious quality, that precious object folding produced. Einar lifted the cloth, unfolded it, found inside the unfolding, a brooch. The veil compass brooch, the crown jewel that the inventory did not list as missing, because the inventory did not know the brooch existed, because the brooch's existence had been erased from the inventory 22 years ago by the particular, deliberate, remove this from the record quality, that deliberate erasure produced. Because 22 years ago, during the succession crisis following King Aldrich Vale's death, the brooch had disappeared from the Crown's holdings, and the disappearance had been filed under the administrative category of classified. And classified meant, not in the general inventory. And not in the general inventory meant, no missing items. And no missing items meant, the Crown did not know it was missing. And the not knowing was 22 years old. And the knowing was now in a cedar box on a governance desk. And the knowing was in the hands holding the box. And the hands were shaking. A cedar box. Delivered through the servant entrance by a woman who left before her name was confirmed. One word burned into the lid. Yours. Inside, the veil compass brooch, classified as disappeared 22 years ago, erased from inventory, the Crown not knowing it was missing. The body knew before the eyes confirmed. The hands were shaking before the lid was open. Chapter 1. The veil compass brooch was not simply jewelry. Nothing that caused the kind of shaking the king's hands produced was simply anything. The brooch was a navigational instrument rendered in precious materials, a functional compass encased in the Vale goldsmith tradition's finest work. The casing, white gold, the particular, cold light quality that white gold carried. The rose, 8 directional points rendered in diamonds whose clarity the Vale Treasury's records described as exceptional, and whose exceptional was the understatement that Crown records applied to objects whose actual quality exceeded the bureaucratic vocabulary's capacity. The needle, a single ruby set in a platinum pivot mechanism, the ruby catching light, the pivot allowing the needle's rotation, the particular, functional, and beautiful quality that the design carried. Functional, the brooch worked. This was the unusual element. Crown jewels typically functioned symbolically. The veil compass brooch functioned actually. Point it north, the needle aligned. The alignment was the function was the design. The design's designer, a goldsmith named Aldrich Vale the Elder, the third king, who had been a navigator before he was a monarch, had made a brooch that worked, because working things were what the navigator's hands knew how to make. The brooch's symbolic function exceeded its navigational function, not for the Crown in general, for the Vale line specifically. The brooch was the coronation object, not the crown, not the scepter, not the particular, ceremonial. These are the visible symbols quality, that visible symbols provided for public ceremonies. The brooch was the private symbol, The object passed from the dying monarch to the successor in the particular, intimate, just the two of us quality that private succession moments contained. The object that the dying king placed in the successor's hands, while the court was not present. The object that said, "Now you navigate." The navigation is the function is the crown. Einar had not received the brooch. This was the 22 years. His father, Aldrich Vale, the sixth king, the dying man in the succession crisis, had been assassinated. The assassination's timing, 3 days before the transition ceremony. The ceremony would have been the private moment. The private moment would have been the brooch. The assassination prevented the ceremony. The ceremony's prevention meant the brooch was not transferred. The brooch's non-transfer meant the successor never received the navigation. The navigation was the function was the crown. The successor governed without it. 22 years of governing without the navigation, without the object that said, "Now you navigate." And the not having was something Einar had processed and filed and managed, because the managing was the governance, and the governance was what the king did, and the king had been doing it for 22 years without the brooch, and the without had not prevented the doing, because the doing was the competence, and the competence was the king's, and the competence did not require the object. The object was not the competence. The object was the symbol was the connection, the particular, lineage. I received this from my father quality, that the object carried, and that the carrying was the continuity, and the continuity was the thing the assassination had severed, and unrepairable, or so the 22 years had concluded. The brooch had vanished in the assassination's aftermath. The aftermath was chaos, the particular, succession crisis, everything is in motion quality, that sudden leadership transitions produced. During the chaos, someone had taken the brooch. The taking was never documented, because documenting the taking would have required acknowledging the brooch's existence in the inventory, and the brooch's inventory existence was classified, and classified items were not generally documented as stolen in the general records, because the classified's documentation was the classified's exposure, and the exposure was what the classification prevented. So, no theft record, no missing item, no investigation. The brooch disappeared into the classified silence, and the silence was 22 years old, and the silence had just been broken by a cedar box and a woman who left without her name. The brooch was in Einar's hands. The ruby needle was aligned north. The compass was working. 22 years later, in a governance office, the navigation was functioning, and the hands that held it were shaking, and the shaking was, my father was supposed to give me this. He could not. Someone kept it for 22 years and then returned it without asking for anything and without leaving their name, and the without is the thing I need to understand, because the without is the person, and the person is the question. Find her. Directed at Commander Petra Aas, the security chief, whose finding people function was the findings mechanism. Find the woman who delivered this box this morning. Everything the door steward remembers. Use it. The Veil Compass Brooch. A functional navigational instrument in white gold, diamonds, ruby. The private coronation object passed from dying king to successor. Einar's father was assassinated 3 days before the transfer. The brooch vanished in the chaos, erased from inventory. 22 years of governing without the symbol of navigation. Now in his hands, ruby needle aligned north. Find the woman who delivered this. Chapter 2. The door steward's account was the finding's starting material. Petter Lund's memory was professional. The particular, trained, I observe and retain quality that long-service door staff developed. The account, a woman. Approximately 30. Omega, medium height. Dark hair worn practical. Clothing clean but working class. The particular, not trying to impress quality that the clothing carried. Calm. Distinctly calm. Delivered the box without ceremony. 1 sentence. Turned. Walked south on the Palace Road. South. The direction was the starting point. Commander Aas's network operating at the particular, methodical, we follow the direction quality that methodical searches produced when the starting data was minimal, and the minimal required the expansion. The expansion was, canvass the southern roads. Canvass the southern neighborhoods. Canvass the southern districts. The canvas produced the sightings. The particular, public space, people saw her quality. that movement through populated areas produced when the movement was recent, and the recent was this morning. The sightings traced a path. The path led south through the market district, through the textile quarter, through the river road that the textile quarter's southern edge produced, to a building 3/4 of a mile from the palace entrance. The building, a workshop. The workshop's function, restoration of antique objects, the particular, conservation, repair and preserve quality that the profession carried. The sign above the door was simple, Bryn Conservation. The name beneath the sign was simple, E. Bryn. Os reported at 4 p.m. The king received the report and processed it through the governance's standard assessment, and the assessment found a conservation workshop, 3/4 of a mile from the palace. The woman's name, E. Bryn. The workshop's function, antique object restoration. The function's relationship to the brooch, obvious. A person who restores antique objects has the particular, trained, I understand what this is, quality, that object restoration required, and whose requiring produced the expertise, and whose expertise, applied to the brooch, had produced the particular, condition assessment. How did she know, quality, that the brooch's return now required understanding? How did she know what the brooch was? How did she know it belonged to the crown? How did she come to have it? How long had she had it? These were the questions. The questions required the person. The person was in a workshop 3/4 of a mile south. The king went, not by escort, alone. The alone was the choice. The particular, personal. This is not a governance matter quality that the alone communicated. The governance would have sent a formal delegation. The particular, representative. The crown sends its representatives quality that formal delegations produced. This was not the governance. This was the king whose father's brooch had been returned by an unnamed woman, and the unnamed was the question, and the question was personal, and the personal traveled alone. The workshop was exactly as the building's exterior suggested, a working space whose working was the function, and the function's priority organized the space around the work, rather than around the appearance. Long tables, natural light, north-facing windows, the particular, consistent. This light does not change throughout the day quality that north-facing windows produced for conservation work, whose consistency requirement was demanding. Tools organized. The particular, every tool has its place quality that professional organization produced in people whose profession's precision required the tool's accessibility, and the accessibility required the organization. Objects on the tables, antique objects, the particular, carefully placed, each one is being assessed quality that in-progress conservation work produced. A bronze vessel, a silver plate, a painted panel, a small carved figure, each object receiving the particular, professional, I am understanding this object quality that conservation work produced. The woman was at the far table, back to the door, the particular, absorbed, the work is the world quality that absorption produced. Working on something small. The smallness was the scale, and the scale required the particular, close. The detail demands proximity quality that small-scale conservation produced. The tools were fine, the particular, delicate. These tools work at the millimeter quality that fine tools carried, working at the millimeter. The absorption was total. The door had made no sound upon the king's entry. Conservation workshops kept doors well-maintained because vibration damaged objects in process. The well-maintained door opened silently. The silently meant the worker did not register the entry. The non-registering allowed approximately 30 seconds of the king standing in a conservation workshop, watching the work being performed, before the worker's peripheral awareness registered the presence, and the registration produced the turning. The turning found a man. In the workshop, not announced, tall. The governance's wear on the face, the particular, decision weight. The face carries what it has been required to carry quality that governance produced in the faces of people who govern. Not in court clothing, in the particular, practical, I dressed for traveling on foot quality that the clothing communicated. She assessed. The assessment was the conservator's, reading an object's condition, determining its nature, identifying what it was. The assessment found, not a customer. The customer quality carried the particular, I want something quality that customers produced. This person carried the particular, I need to understand something quality that distinguished from the customer. Not wanting, needing to understand. Different category. You are E. Bryn. Statement, not question. The delivery carrying the governance's particular. I have assessed and I am confirming quality. Aya Bryn. The correction, the full name rather than the initial. Delivered with the particular, professional. My name is this quality, that corrections produced when the correcting was factual. She did not add, and you are the king. She did not add, I was expecting you. She did not add anything, because the correction was sufficient, and the sufficient was the response, and the response was complete. You returned the box this morning. The king's second statement. The brooch. Asia assessed the confirmation's content with the conservator's eye, reading the statement the way she read objects, looking for the structural information beneath the surface. The statement carried, I know it was you. The king knows. The knowing brings the king here. The king is here without ceremony. The ceremony's absence says this is personal. The personal's content was readable in the hands, the particular, I have been holding something difficult quality, that the hands carried when the carrying was emotional, and the emotional was visible in the physical. She read the hands. The hands were still now, but the stillness carried the particular, recently shaking, the steadying is new quality, that recent shaking produced in hands that were attempting composure. The brooch shook your hands, not a question, an observation. The conservator's particular, I read what I see quality. Einar received the observation. The receiving was the acknowledgement. The particular, yes it did quality, that the acknowledgement carried. Yes, the brooch shook my hands, before I opened the box. The body knew, before the eyes confirmed. Then you knew what it was before you saw it. The response carrying the conservator's precision, the particular, if a then be quality that the logical sequence produced. The body's knowing required prior knowledge. Prior knowledge meant the brooch was known. The known required the connection. The connection was the inheritance. The inheritance was what the assassination had severed. I knew what the size meant. 22 years of not knowing where it was, but always knowing what the size of the container would be. My father described it. Before. The before was the particular, temporal, what existed prior to the assassination quality that the before contained. Asia received the before. The receiving was the conservator's, absorbing the object's history the way conservation absorbed the damage's history. The history was the information was the assessment's foundation. She turned from the table. The turning was the full attention, the particular, I am leaving the work because this requires the presence quality, that full attention produced when the attention's subject exceeded the work's priority. The work was the function. This person's presence exceeded the function's priority. The exceeding was, the king whose father's brooch she had held for 6 months, had just described his father's voice to her in a conservation workshop on a Wednesday afternoon, and the describing was the most intimate thing the king had said aloud in the king's professional assessment, and the professional assessment was, this person is in a room, and the room is not a governance room, and the being in a non-governance room is the accessing of something the governance does not typically access. Found 3/4 of a mile south. Bryn Conservation. E. Bryn, conservator of antique objects. She didn't announce him or acknowledge his title. The brooch shook your hands. Before I opened the box, the body knew, before the eyes confirmed. You knew what the size meant. He had described the container's dimensions 22 years ago from his father's description, the most intimate thing the king had said in a professional setting. Chapter 3. How did you find it? The question that the preceding statements had been building toward. The particular, I need the origin quality, that the question produced, when the origin was the everything, and the everything was, where did the veil compass brooch go for 22 years, and how did a conservator come to have it, and how did the conservator know what it was, and how did the conservator know to whom it belonged? Sit down. The direction, from the conservator to the king, in the conservator's workshop. The direction carried the particular, authority of the space quality, that space authority produced when the space's owner was the space's authority, and the space's authority exceeded the visitor's title, because in the space, the authority was competence, and competence was the conservator's. The king sat. There was one chair, the conservator's working chair, positioned at the long table. Aya leaned against the opposite table. The particular, I am standing, because I choose to quality, that standing communicated when the standing was elected. 6 months ago, a woman came to this workshop with a collection. The conservator's account beginning in the particular, professional, I am reporting what I observed quality. The account was precise. The conservation profession trained precision because imprecision damaged objects, and damaged objects were the failure. The account did not imprecise. The woman was elderly, 70, perhaps more. She carried a leather case, old leather, the kind that quality leather produces when quality leather is maintained across decades. The case contained 12 objects. She wanted them assessed, not repaired, assessed. The particular, I want to know what these are, quality that assessment-only commissions carried. I assessed them. 11 were straightforward, personal items of family significance, no particular historical provenance, the kind of collection that families accumulate across generations, quality objects, personal objects, unremarkable to anyone outside the family. The 12th was the brooch. The account paused. The pausing was the professionals. The particular, the 12th requires the separate treatment quality that the pausing communicated. The 12th was different from the first 11. The first 11 were personal. The 12th was historical. The particular, immediately recognizable, I know what this is, quality, that historical objects produced in the conservator, whose training included the Veil Crown's documented holdings, and whose holdings documentation included, in the classified appendix, the restricted archive that the conservation profession's senior practitioners could access through the professional credentialing system, the Veil Compass brooch. The classified appendix. AYA's access to the classified appendix was the profession's, the particular, senior practitioner, I have the credentials quality that the access required. The credentials were 12 years of conservation practice, a guild certification at the master level, and the particular, institutional, the guild vouches for this person's discretion quality that guild certification carried. The classified appendix listed the brooch as disappeared. Not stolen, disappeared. The distinction was the classification's careful language. Disappeared meant the item's absence from the Crown's possession was known to the classification, but the item's location and the absence's cause were not. Disappeared was the formal acknowledgement that something existed and was gone without documenting where or how. She recognized the brooch from the classified appendix's description. The gold, the ruby, the pivot mechanism, the dimensions. The description was precise. The object was the description. The match was complete. The 12th object in the elderly woman's leather case was the Veil Compass brooch. What did you do? The king's question carrying the particular, I am following the account quality, that following carried when the following's content was critical, and the critical was, what did you do when you found it? I completed the assessment. The professional's response, the particular, I finished what I was commissioned to do quality. I completed the assessment of all 12 objects, and I provided the elderly woman with written documentation for each. I documented the brooch as a navigational instrument of historical significance, with royal provenance. I used the term royal provenance without specifying which crown, because specificity would have exceeded the assessment's scope, and exceeded scope is not the conservator's function. Assessment is the function. I assessed, then the woman left. She took 11 of the 12 objects. The 11th she took. The 12th, the account paused. The 12th she left. She left the brooch. She left the brooch, deliberately. No instruction, no explanation. The case closed around 11 objects and not 12, and she left without explaining the 12th's exclusion. I asked. She said, some objects know where they belong. The answer was not an explanation. The answer was the thing she chose to say. I accepted the thing she chose to say, because the saying was hers, and she was the client, and the client's choices were the client's. Who was she? The king's question carrying the particular, I need the name quality. She gave her name as Marta. No surname. Marta. She paid for the assessment in advance, in coin. The particular, no paper trail. Cash quality, that advance coin payment produced. She did not provide an address for the documentation's delivery. She said she would collect it, which she did, returning 3 days later for the written assessment. She left no information beyond the name and the payment and the collection. I have no way to locate her further. Marta. The name received by the king with the particular. I am processing this quality. Marta. 70 years old. A leather case. 12 objects. 11 taken. 1 left. Some objects know where they belong. The accounting continued. I held the brooch for 6 months. The holding was not possession. The holding was the particular, professional. I am maintaining this object's condition quality that conservation holdings produced. During the 6 months, the assessment deepened. The conservator's particular, I look more closely when I have time quality that extended examination produced. The deeper assessment found the brooch had been maintained. Not conserved, maintained. The distinction was the conservator's. Conservation addressed damage. Maintenance prevented damage. The brooch showed maintenance. Careful, regular. The particular, someone has been caring for. This quality that maintained objects carried. Regular cleaning, appropriate storage. The particular, loved. This object has been treated as precious quality that loved objects produced in the conservator's assessment. The brooch had been maintained with care for 22 years. The care was the elderly woman's. The care said, whoever held this brooch understood what it was and treated it accordingly. Then I made a decision. The account's transition, the particular, I am now going to tell you the part that is harder quality, that transitions carried, when the harder was coming. I decided the brooch needed to be returned. Not because I was legally obligated. The circumstances of the brooch's provenance were complex, and the legal framework for objects of classified status was ambiguous. Not because of professional obligation. My obligation was to the client, and the client had left the object, and the left object's fate was professionally ambiguous. I decided for the particular, simple, this is where it belongs quality, that simple decisions carried when the simple was, the brooch belongs to the crown, and the crown's possession is where the brooch should be, and the should is the decision, and the decision is, return it. Why Wednesday? The king's question arriving with the particular, I am noting the specificity quality. I was ready Wednesday. The simple answer carrying the particular, the preparation, was complete quality, that ready communicated. The cedar box, made by me, the particular, personal, I am making the container quality. The joinery took 2 weeks. The cedar was selected for the scent and the preservation quality. Cedar maintains object condition through the aromatic oils. The burning of yours took 1 evening. 1 word. The word was sufficient. The preparation was the respect. The respect was, the brooch deserved a container made for it specifically, not an existing box, not a purchased case, a made box, made by the hands that had been caring for the object. The care extended to the container. The container was the care's final expression. 6 months ago, an elderly woman named Marta, a leather case, 12 objects. She left the 12th, the brooch, with the instruction, some objects know where they belong. The brooch had been maintained for 22 years with love. The return decision, simple. This is where it belongs. The cedar box was made by the conservator's own hands over 2 weeks. Joinery, cedar selected for preservation. Yours burned in 1 evening. The care extended to the container. Chapter 4. The workshop held the account. Held it the way conservation objects held their histories, absorbing the information into the material carrying the history visible to the trained eye that knew how to read it. The king was not a conservator. The king could not read objects the way Aya read them, but the king could read this. A woman who made a cedar box for 2 weeks to contain an object she was returning without compensation because the object knew where it belonged. What would you like? The king's question arriving after the account's conclusion with the particular, I need to respond to what you have done quality. Not, what is your price? Not the governance's transactional framing. What would you like, the personal framing? The particular, I am asking the person quality that the personal produced. Aya assessed the question. The assessment was the conservator's, reading the question's structure, identifying its nature. The question was genuine. The genuine was, not rhetorical, not diplomatic, not the governance's formulaic acknowledgement quality. Genuine, the genuinely asking what you want quality, that genuine questions carried. Nothing. The response, delivered with the particular, complete, the answer is contained quality. Nothing. I returned the brooch because it belongs to the crown. The belonging is its own reason. The reason does not require compensation. The compensation would convert the returning into a transaction, and the transaction is not what the returning was. The returning was right. The right is sufficient. The sufficient does not require the addition of compensation. The nothing landed. The landing's weight was the nothing's quality. The particular, unusual. Most people want something quality, that nothing carried, when nothing was the genuine response to a question, that most people answered with something. Most people wanted something. This person wanted nothing. The nothing was. The returning was complete. The completion was the satisfaction. The satisfaction required nothing additional. The governance processed. The nothing is the response, and the nothing is genuine, and the genuine nothing is the rarest response to the Crown's question, because the Crown's question is understood by most people to be the opportunity, and the opportunity is the thing most people prepare for, and this person either did not prepare or prepared for nothing, and the prepared for nothing is the decision, and the decision is, I wanted no reward, and I still want no reward, and the wanting nothing is my position. But the king was not only the governance. The governance processed the nothing with the institutional's assessment. The person processed the nothing with the personal's. And the personal's assessment of the nothing was, the woman who made a cedar box for 2 weeks, and burned one word into the lid, and carried it 3/4 of a mile on foot, and handed it over, and walked away, and is now telling the king she wants nothing, is a person whose wanting nothing is not indifference. The wanting nothing is the particular, resolved, I do not want what most people want quality, that resolution produced when the resolution was genuine, and the genuine was, I wanted to return something, and the returning was the wanting, and the wanting is now complete, and the complete does not require an addition. Tell me about the brooch, the king's redirection, not from the governance but from the person, the particular, I want to hear what you know quality that the redirecting carried. What did you find when you assessed it? The redirection was the opening, not strategic, genuine, the person asking the conservator to share the professional's knowledge, because the knowledge was the connection, and the connection was, the brooch had been in this person's hands for 6 months, and the 6 months had produced the knowledge, and the knowledge was about the object that the king had waited 22 years to hold, and the holding was this afternoon, and the waiting was the history, and the history was the connection. Asia moved to the work table, not the table where the king sat, the adjacent table where the assessment tools were organized. She retrieved a magnifying loupe, the conservator's particular, 10 times, I see at this resolution quality, that the loupe provided. She produced from a shallow drawer a set of documentation photographs, the assessment images, taken during the 6 months. She placed the photographs on the table between them. Between, the particular, shared. Both of us can see these quality, that between communicated. Here. The pointer's index finger indicating the first photograph, the diamond clarity, the Vale goldsmith tradition used a specific cutting technique in the 3rd century, the particular, facet arrangement, this is identifiable quality. See the pavilion facets, they are arranged in the Vale tradition pattern. 8 facets per diamond, arranged symmetrically around the central culet. The 8 matches the 8 compass points. The design was intentional. The diamonds mirror the instrument's function. 8 points of navigation. 8 facets of light. The same number in the same object for the same reason. The king leaned over the photograph. The leaning was the attention, the particular, genuine, I am looking quality, that leaning produced when the leaning was the engagement, and the engagement was real. The 8 facets. The 8 compass points. The same number. Your ancestor designed the diamonds to match the compass rose. The king's observation carrying the particular, arriving, I am understanding this quality. He designed it as a unified instrument, not a compass with decorative diamonds. A unified object in which every element serves the function and the decoration and the function are the same thing. The facets navigate light the way the needle navigates direction. The object navigates on 2 registers simultaneously, the physical and the metaphorical. The physical and the metaphorical. The king's repetition was not mechanical. The particular, I am receiving this. The repetition is the processing quality that genuine repetition produced, when the repetition was the thought forming, rather than the echo reflecting. 2 more hours. The workshop held 2 more hours of the conservator's account, and the king's listening, the photographs and the loop, and the documentation, and the particular, professional, I am sharing what 12 years of looking produced quality that the sharing carried. The ruby's composition, pyrope garnet with chromium inclusions, the particular, blood red, this specific color quality that the chromium produced and that the 3rd century goldsmith had selected for the specific quality, red aligned with north, meant the heart points toward the right direction. The platinum pivots engineering, the particular, friction minimized, the needle moves freely quality that the pivots engineering produced. The engineering was 2 centuries ahead of the period's standard metalworking. The goldsmith king was not only a navigator, the goldsmith king was an engineer. The account produced the knowing, the particular accumulated, I now understand this object quality, that the knowing produced after 2 hours in a workshop with a conservator whose 6 months of close examination had produced the knowing that 22 years of the brooch's absence had prevented the king from developing. 22 years of not knowing the object that was supposed to have been passed from father to son. 2 hours of being taught the object by the person who had held it for 6 months. The being taught was the intimacy, not the romantic, the particular, professional, I am receiving your knowledge quality, that being taught produced when the teaching was genuine expertise, and the receiving was genuine attention, and the 2 genuines together produced the intimacy that genuine exchange generated. The intimacy was the conservation workshop's product, the workshop providing the context, and the context providing the exchange, and the exchange providing the 2 hours, and the 2 hours providing the knowing. 2 hours in the workshop. Documentation photographs. The diamonds matched the compass rose. 8 facets, 8 points, the same number intentional. He designed it as a unified object. The decoration and the function are the same thing. The ruby, heart red, aligned to north, means the heart points toward the right direction. 2 centuries of engineering ahead of its time. 22 years of not knowing the object replaced by 2 hours of being taught it by the person who had held it for 6 months. Chapter 5. The visits became the weekly, not through the governance's scheduling, through the personals. The king returning to Bryn Conservation the following Tuesday, with a question the Monday's governance had produced. A document referencing the Vale Crown's 3rd century holdings had described an object whose description partially matched the brooch's, but differed in one particular. The particular was, the early document listed 4 diamonds, not the 8 the brooch contained. The discrepancy required the conservation expertise. The expertise was Asia's. The Tuesday visit was the pretext. Not dishonest. The document discrepancy was genuine, and the genuine required the expert's assessment. But the pretext's honesty did not prevent the pretext from being the pretext. The visit was the returning. The returning was the wanting. The wanting was, I want to come back to this workshop. Aya assessed the document. The assessment found, the early document was describing an intermediate state. The brooch had been modified in the 5th decade of the 3rd century. The 4-diamond design replaced with the 8-diamond design, after the Vale line's expansion required the upgrade. The upgrade was documented in the goldsmith's records that the Conservation Archive held. The discrepancy was explainable. The explanation was provided. The explanation's provision took 20 minutes. The remaining 90 minutes of the Tuesday visit were not the explanation. The remaining 90 minutes were the workshop's other objects. The conservator's current work, the bronze vessel from the first visit, which had been fully assessed and was now in the cleaning phase. The cleaning was the work. The work continued during the visit. The continuation was the workshop's quality. The work did not pause for visits. The work was the function. The function continued. The visitor could observe or not observe. The visitor observed. The bronze vessel's cleaning was a process that took full attention. The particular, millimeter scale, every surface is relevant quality that the cleaning demanded. The cleaning used tools whose scale matched the demand. The smallest brushes, the particular, sable hair, these hold the cleaning solution at the correct saturation quality that sable hair provided. The work was visible. The visitor watched. The watching produced questions. Not the governance's questions. The curious person's. What is the cleaning solution? The particular, interested, I want to know how this works quality that genuine curiosity produced. Aya answered. The answer produced a follow-up question. The follow-up produced a further answer. The exchange was the conversation, and the conversation was the workshop's quality, technical, specific, the particular, two people looking at the same thing quality, that the workshop's shared focus produced. The focus was the object was the bronze vessel. The bronze vessel was not the brooch. The bronze vessel was not the governance. The bronze vessel was neither person's emotional history. The bronze vessel was simply itself, a 3rd century ceremonial object requiring cleaning, providing the particular, neutral, the object is the subject quality, that neutral subjects provided in conversations between two people whose actual subject was each other, and whose actual subject was not yet being directly addressed. The Tuesday became the fixture, not announced, established through the particular, repeated, this is happening weekly quality, that repetition established without declaration. The King's Tuesday schedule developed a gap that the schedule's managers acknowledged without questioning, because the King's schedule gaps were the King's, and the King's were not questioned. The gap was 3 hours. The gap was Bryn conservation. The gap was the workshop, and the work, and the conversation, and the particular, weekly. This is the time quality that weekly fixtures provided. The conservator's life did not reorganize for the Tuesday. The work continued, the bronze vessel completed, followed by the silver plate, followed by the painted panel. The conservation sequence was the conservation's calendar. The calendar did not adjust for the Tuesday's visitor. The visitor adjusted for the calendar. The adjusting was the respect, the particular, your work is the priority quality that the adjusting communicated. The King sat beside the work. The work continued. The sitting was the presence, and the presence was the respect, and the respect was, I am here, and the here is yours. The brooch was discussed during the 4th Tuesday. The particular, I have been thinking about what you said quality, that time produced in questions that required time. The pivoting mechanisms engineering you described, the friction minimization. Can you show me? Not the brooch itself, which was now in the Crown's secure holdings. The principle. Can you show me the principle on another object? Aya retrieved from the reference shelf a collection of pivot mechanisms, the workshop's teaching collection. The particular, I used these for demonstration quality that teaching collections served. She demonstrated. The demonstration was, hold this. The King held the demonstration piece. Feel the resistance here. The King felt the resistance. Now this, the well-maintained pivot. Feel the difference. The King felt the difference. The difference was the friction's absence. The absence was the engineering. The engineering was 2 centuries ahead of its time, and the time was the 3rd century, and the 3rd century's engineering was in the hands of a king in a conservation workshop on a Tuesday afternoon, and the holding was the learning, and the learning was the touch. Touch. The particular, professional, I am teaching through the tactile quality that the touch provided in conservation education, whose tactile component was the primary. Aya's teaching was touch-based, the touching being the knowing, and the knowing being the learning, and the learning being the touch. The touching was professional. The professional was the context. The context did not prevent the touching from being also the particular, personal. This is the first-time quality that first touches produced, when the first was genuine, and the genuine was the context, and the context was the workshop, and the workshop was the world that existed between the governance wing and the life that the governance wing did not contain. The visits became weekly, Tuesdays, 3 hours. The King returned with genuine questions. The work continued during visits, the bronze vessel, the silver plate, the painted panel. The King adjusted to the work's schedule, not the reverse. The respect was, your work is the priority. The teaching was touch-based. The tactile was the knowing. The workshop was the world that the governance wing did not contain. Chapter 6. The 8th Tuesday. The painted panel was complete. The restoration having produced the particular, revealed, the original is now visible quality, that completed restoration, produced when the restoration's purpose was the revealing, and the revealing was the original surface beneath the damage, and the damage was centuries of accumulated grime, and the grime's removal was the restoration, and the removal had taken 6 weeks, and the 6 weeks were completed, and the panel was revealed. The original surface was a navigational chart, not a painting, a navigational chart rendered with the particular, artistic. This is both functional and beautiful quality that the veil 3rd century tradition produced in objects the tradition made. Not an accident, intentional. The panel was a navigation tool disguised as a painting. The panel's cover, landscape imagery. Underneath the landscape, the navigational lines, the compass points, the coastal markings that the chart's function required. A functional object made beautiful, so the beauty concealed the function. The function concealed by beauty, the observation landing in the workshop with the particular, resonant, this keeps happening quality that patterns produced when the pattern appeared across multiple objects. The brooch, a navigational instrument made beautiful. The panel, a navigational chart made beautiful. The pattern, the veil 3rd century tradition made functional things beautiful, concealed their function in their beauty, produced objects that could be appreciated for the surface and used for the substance. The pattern's observation was Einar's, arriving through 8 Tuesdays of looking at objects beside a conservator who looked at objects differently. The particular, I am learning to read this quality, that 8 Tuesdays of proximity to a different way of seeing, produced in the person who was learning the different way. You have been teaching me to see. From the 3rd stool, the 2nd stool having been added during the 2nd Tuesday, the 3rd added during the 5th when the need for it became apparent. The observation arriving with the particular, I am naming, what has been happening quality. I have been showing you objects. The response, the particular, corrective, you are the one doing the seeing quality. The showing is mine, the seeing is yours. The seeing requires the showing. The insistence gentle, not an argument but the particular, I need you to accept the credit quality that gentle insistence produced when the credit was accurate, and the accurate required the accepting. Aja received the insistence. The receiving was the assessment, reading the insistence's quality. Not flattery. Not the governance's strategic positioning that produced flattery. The particular, genuine, I am saying what I observe quality, that genuine observation produced in the person making it. The observation was, you have been teaching me, the teaching is yours, the receiving is mine. The receiving's quality has been, good, you are a good student. The compliment arrived as the conservator's, delivered with the conservator's particular, I assess, quality in everything quality, that the professional carried. Good student. The assessment of quality in the learning the way quality was assessed in the object. The assessment said, the learning has been genuine, and the genuine has produced the quality, and the quality is good. The compliment was the assessment. The assessment was the compliment. The panel was between them. The revealed navigational chart, the landscape's surface, and the function's substance coexisting in the same object, both present, both real, the surface and the substance, the beauty and the function, 2 things at once. The king's observation directed at the panel. The panel is both things at once. The surface and the substance don't cancel each other. They coexist. The beauty doesn't undermine the function. The function doesn't undermine the beauty. They're the same thing expressed on different registers simultaneously. Aya looked at the panel, then at the man making the observation. The looking was the assessment. The particular, what is he actually saying quality that the looking carried when the saying appeared to be about the panel, and might also be about something that was not the panel, like the brooch. The king's continuation, answering the looking's question without the question being asked. The brooch functions. It also means, the functioning and the meaning are both real, both present. The needle aligns north, and the ruby means, the heart follows the right direction, and the two, the physical and the metaphorical, coexist in the same object without canceling each other. Aya received the continuation. The receiving produced the assessment. He is saying something about objects, and the something is also about the something that is not objects, and the not objects is this, the workshop, the Tuesdays, the function and the meaning of the Tuesdays, coexisting the way the brooch's function and meaning coexisted. The Tuesday had a function, the governance's question, the pretext genuine enough quality, the expert's assessment. The Tuesday had a meaning, the returning, the presence, the particular, I want to be in this room quality, that meaning produced, both present, both real, coexisting. Some objects know where they belong. She repeated the elderly woman's words, the Marta's words, the words she had accepted without explanation 6 months ago. The words had been about the brooch. The words were now about something else simultaneously. The simultaneous was the workshop's quality, two things at once. The king looked at the conservator. Not the governance's look, the personal's, the particular, I am looking at you quality, that the look produced when the looking was the person, rather than the position, and the person's looking was the genuine, and the genuine was, I have been coming to this workshop for 8 Tuesdays, and the Tuesdays have been the best 8 Tuesdays of the 22 years since the before, and the before was my father's voice describing the brooch, and the after was 8 Tuesdays beside a conservator, who taught me to see the objects my ancestor made, and the seeing has produced the knowing, and the knowing is, I want more Tuesdays. The wanting is the function. The meaning is, the wanting is the meaning. Some objects know where they belong. The king's repetition of the Marta's words, back to the person who had first repeated them. The returning of the words the way the brooch had been returned. Something that belongs here. Yours. The returning was the saying. The saying was the words. The words were, the object has found its place. The place is, here. The here is, this workshop, on Tuesdays, with the work continuing, and the visitor present, and the both present at once, and the both being the function, and the meaning, and the two coexisting without canceling each other. Aya looked at the panel, at the navigational lines beneath the landscape's surface, at the function concealed in the beauty and the beauty concealing the function, at the both at once quality that the veil 3rd century tradition had built into every object it made, because the tradition's maker was a navigator who became a king, and the navigating was the function, and the making beautiful was the meaning, and the two were always the same thing. You navigate differently now, her observation, the particular, I have been reading the object quality that the 8 Tuesdays had produced in her reading of him. In the beginning, the governance's navigation. Every question was the governance's, every observation was the governance's assessment applied to the objects. 8 Tuesdays later, something different. The questions are curious rather than strategic. The observations are the persons rather than the positions. The navigation has shifted from, what does this require, to, what is this? The brooch shifted it. The king's identification, the particular, tracing back to the origin quality. The brooch arrived and the shaking arrived, and the shaking was the knowing, and the knowing arrived before the seeing, and the before the seeing was the first time in 22 years that something bypassed the governance and arrived directly in the person, and the arriving was the shaking, and the shaking led here, and here is the workshop, and the workshop is 8 Tuesdays of learning to see differently. The panel was between them. The brooch was 3/4 of a mile north in the Crown's secure holdings. The workshop was the present. The present contained 2 people, and one revealed navigational chart, and one conversation, and the particular, arrived, both at once quality, that arrived things produced when the arriving was the function, and the meaning simultaneously. 8th Tuesday, the painted panel revealed, a navigational chart disguised as a landscape, pattern emerging, the veil tradition made functional things beautiful, concealed function in beauty, both real simultaneously. Some objects know where they belong. The words repeated, now about the workshop, the Tuesdays, the wanting. You navigate differently now. The questions are curious, rather than strategic. The brooch shifted it. The shaking arrived before the seeing. The before the seeing was the first time in 22 years something bypassed the governance and arrived directly in the person. Epilogue. The Tuesdays continued. 22 of them accumulated over the following months. 1 Tuesday for each year the brooch had been absent, as if the accumulation was the mathematics, and the mathematics was the repair, and the repair was the restitution of the 22 years through the particular, ongoing, we are still here quality, that the continued Tuesdays provided. Einar learned to read objects, not the conservator's full expertise. 12 years could not be transferred in Tuesdays, but the reading's principle, look at the surface and look at the substance, both are real, neither cancels the other. The surface is not the lie covering the substance. The surface is the beauty, and the substance is the function, and the two coexist without hierarchy. The reading became the governance's contribution, the particular, new instrument. The king now brings a different lens quality that the reading provided when the reading was applied to governance rather than to objects. Policy had surfaces and substances. The surface was the stated intent, The substance was the actual effect, both visible if the reading was practiced. The reading's practice produced the governance differently, not dramatically, incrementally. The particular, thread by thread, the fabric changes quality that incremental production carried. The brooch was redocumented. The classified appendix's entry revised, no longer disappeared, present, in the Crown's secure holdings. The correction was administrative. A single word changed, disappeared, becoming present. But the word's changing was the record's correction, and the record's correction was the history's acknowledgement, and the history's acknowledgement was, the brooch was gone, and now it is found, and the finding is the object of the record, because the record's function is the truth, and the truth is, the brooch came home. Marta was not located. Commander Oss's network extended the search for the elderly woman who had left the brooch with the conservator, extended it for 4 months with the particular, thorough, we have checked every available source quality that thorough searches produced. The finding, no Marta matching the description in the searchable records. The not finding produced 2 possible conclusions. The name was false, the particular, deliberate anonymity, she did not want to be found quality, or the woman's records were not in the searchable system, the particular, elderly, some people predate the record's quality that record gaps produced. Either possible, neither resolvable. Marta, unlocated, the leaving of the brooch, unexplained beyond the words she had offered. Some objects know where they belong. The explanation was the sentence. The sentence was sufficient. The sufficient did not require the additional. The brooch was worn for the first time in 22 years, on the occasion of a private ceremony. Not a state ceremony, the particular, intimate, just the 2 of us quality that private ceremonies produced. 2 people in the governance wing's smaller room, the room used for the particularly private moments that governance occasionally required, and that the smaller room's scale communicated. This is not for the court. This is for the persons. The ceremony was the wearing, the brooch pinned to the king's collar, the place the coronation tradition specified, the pinning performed by Asia. Not because the protocol required the pinning's performer to be the conservator, the protocol specified the successor's primary person. The protocol was old. The protocol did not specify the primary person's title. The primary person was the person the king named as primary. The named was the conservator. The conservator performed the pinning. The ruby needle aligned north when the pinning was complete, the function continuing, the brooch working, the compass pointing, the needle finding the direction. North. The heart follows the right direction. The ancestor's design, operating across the centuries for exactly the purpose the design intended, telling the person wearing the instrument which way to go. Asia's workshop expanded, not physically, in scope. The Crown's conservation contracts, the particular, institutional. The Crown has objects requiring ongoing maintenance quality that the Crown's holdings produced, were consolidated under Bryn Conservation. The consolidation was the governance's administrative decision. The administrative decision was also the personal's. The king wanted the conservator to have the work, and the work deserved the conservator, and the conservator deserved the work. Both true simultaneously. The function and the meaning coexisting. Their daughter was named Aldrich, for the navigator king, the ancestor who had made a compass that was also a brooch, and a brooch that was also a heart-pointing instrument. Named for the tradition, make functional things beautiful. Make beautiful things functional. Never sacrifice one for the other. Both, always, simultaneously. The elderly woman named Marta remained unknown. Remained the particular, unresolved, some stories do not close completely quality, that unresolved stories produced. She had held the brooch for 22 years with care, maintained it, protected it, and then given it to a conservator whose profession was caring for objects, and whose caring had continued for 6 months, and whose 6 months had ended in a cedar box with one word burned into the lid. The chain, someone kept the brooch safe for 22 years, someone gave it to the right hands returned it, the returning produced the shaking produced the finding produced the Tuesdays produced the knowing produced everything after. The chain had 3 links. The first link, Marta. The second link, the cedar box, and the burned word, and the morning walk, and the woman who left before her name was confirmed. The third link, a governance desk, and a lid lifted, and hands that knew before the eyes confirmed. and the knowing was 22 years old, and the knowing was 4 years old, and the knowing arrived as the shaking that the knowing produced. The brooch was in its place. The needle aligned north. The heart follows the right direction. The right direction was the workshop, the Tuesdays, the work continuing while the visitor sat beside it, the function and the meaning coexisting in the same space, the way the surface and the substance coexisted in the same panel, and the compass points and the diamond facets coexisted in the same brooch, and the navigation and the love coexisted in the same 22 years that had been a loss and were now a finding. Some objects know where they belong. The brooch knew. The brooch came home, and the woman who understood what the brooch was and made it a cedar box and carried it 3/4 of a mile and said something that belongs here, she knew too. The knowing was the returning. The returning was the finding. The finding was yours, and yours was the word burned into the cedar lid in the particular, careful, each letter deliberate quality that slow burning produced. Yours. One word. Sufficient. The sufficient was the everything. The everything was here. At last. Home.